Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's 9th annual but first ever virtual Communicating Science seminar. We're so glad to have you all here with us today. So some of you may have been here this morning, but I'll go over a few brief things for those who are joining us now for the first time. My name is Alana Kimbrell, and I am with the AAAS Center for Public Engagement with Science and Technology, which runs this seminar every year. Several of our staff, Emily Cloyd and Stacy Baker, are helping out in the chat today, so you may see them there, and everyone is helping in some way today. So thank you so much to all of our great team. So I'd like to open this virtual space today with a form of land acknowledgement, first by asking all of you to do something to ground yourselves as we begin this session, whether it's taking 3 deep breaths or closing your email inbox. Then I'd like to acknowledge that our work occurs on Indigenous lands. For those who would like to do so, you may put the names of Indigenous peoples you would like to honor in the chat, or take a moment in your own space to say their names or to look them up. Emily is putting a link to an Indigenous lands map in the chat. So in the virtual platform, you'll see there's a Q&A section down below the video. So you can see the chat there. So thank you all. All right, so I want to mention, in addition to the panel happening now, we have a series of breakouts this afternoon. At 1:30 Eastern, we have 3 one-hour sessions, Make Your Own Science Zine, a DIY workshop for communicating science with art, tools for developing public engagement activities, and building capacity, which has 2 parts, the broader impacts wizard and building capacity for institutional support. And third, equity-centered community design for environmental communication and justice. At 3 p.m. Eastern, we have 3 more sessions, each of them an hour. Stuck in the Middle School with You, inspiring the next generation of STEM innovators, rapid funded research on STEM learning and engagement in the midst of the COVID-19 and racial justice crises. And finally, research practice partnerships for advancing public engagement with science. So in your virtual platform, we'd all like to hear from you as well. So in the polls section, if you just toggle over from the Q&A to the polls, you'll see there that we have a poll for you to start off this morning. Some of you may have already started responding to that. So we'll see this on my screen now as well, the word cloud that you're all contributing to. So why is public engagement with science important to you? Equity, building curiosity, sustainability, impact, those are being mentioned a lot. I'll just leave this open for a little longer so you can enter your answers. Great, thank you. We'll leave that open so you can keep answering it, but I'm going to go ahead in the interest of time and start our panel today. So again, you can ask your questions at any point in the Q&A, and we'll be collecting those so that our moderator can feed them to our panelists during the discussion portion of the session. So we'll try to get to as many as we can today. You can also follow along with our discussion on Twitter. We'll be tweeting from @_SciComm, and we're using the hashtag
It seems like we've lost Alana, so I would like to just go ahead and introduce our moderator for today. Raj Pandya is going to take it from here.
Thanks very much, Emily, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending upon where you are. I think you're in for a real treat. These are some amazing projects that we're going to learn about, and there will be lots of opportunity for interaction, I hope, in the period after. The way it's going to work, we're going to do brief presentations from each group, and then we'll open it up for a general discussion. The first presentation will be by Francisco Guajardo and Alex Rosales, and the second will be by Tanya Shu and Karel Askew. So starting with the first group, Francisco Guajardo is the Chief Executive Officer in the Museum of South Texas History in Edinburgh, Texas. A child of South Texas and the northeastern Mexico borderland, he was raised on both sides of the border, attended public schools in a rural community in the Rio Grande Valley, and became an educator. He earned a BA in English, an MA in history, and an interdisciplinary PhD in history and educational administration from the University of Austin, University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Guajardo worked in public schools as a teacher and administrator for 12 years, as a professor and administrator for higher education for 18 years. He's authored or co-authored 3 books and over 50 articles on topics that include education, community leadership, history, organizational development, Latino epistemologies, and museum leadership. And since September of 2019, he's been the CEO of the Museum of South Texas History. His partner in the presentation is Alex Rosales. He's an associate professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Biology and the School for Earth, Environmental, and Marine Sciences at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And a cool thing about the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, it's a federally designated Hispanic serving institution. It's located right at the Texas-Mexico border. Alex is also a 2018-19 AAAS Leshner Public Engagement Fellow in Food and Water Security. And at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, he oversees an academic program focused on participatory research and education in restorative agriculture, agroecology, soil conservation management, and food and farm justice. A big part of his professional agenda focuses on capacity building for underserved students, community partners, and farmers through informed action research, access to education, and community engagement. And with that, I'll hand this over to Alex and Francisco.
Great. Thank you, Raj, for the introduction. Francisco and I have a presentation for you. What we're going to try to do is just kind of divvy the time up and the space. We are excited to share with you the partnership that we have between the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, as well as with the Museum of South Texas History. In regards to the theme of this workshop, which is to really explore ways to facilitate genuine engagement between the faculty in my college, the College of Sciences, and the community of South Texas. We started this partnership a few years ago, actually, when Francisco was still at the University of Texas as a faculty member. But actually, the partnership has strengthened in different ways once he moved over to the Museum of South Texas History. Can we have the next slide, please? So just a really quick introduction of where we are. We're at the very southern tip of Texas, right along the US-Mexico border. And in fact, I have a picture in my background of the river that divides the two countries, the Rio Grande or the Rio Bravo. So UTRGV is one of the newest higher education institutions in the country, just formed in 2015, with the mission to transform the region and the world through innovative and accessible education that promotes student success, that promotes research, that promotes creative works and scholarship, health and well-being, sustainable development, and community engagement. And so I put the mission of the university right here. And we're one of a handful of universities that is starting to embed this idea of engagement with community into the mission of what we do. And of course, the challenge is to figure out, how do you operationalize the word? How do you actually do meaningful community engagement, especially where you have faculty who kind of have different preconceptions or misconceptions of what it means to work with community, who are we working with, and who are they actually. In addition to some of the challenges that our faculty have, or questions that our faculty have in terms of what are the expectations and the incentives that we have both at the university and as a scholar in the academy. And then finally, we do have discussions about what it means to do this in the crisis, in the context of what we're experiencing now with the crises of the global pandemic and the reckoning of systemic racism that's happening in our country. And so we have designed some workshops that really talk about and explore how to do community engagement in these contexts. Can I have the next slide, please? So working with Francisco and at the Museum of South Texas History, we have designed these workshops that really introduce faculty members to the community, right? And so what better way to connect the faculty to the community with an institution like a museum of history, who has primary evidence of what these communities, who these communities are. And can I have the next slide, please? Really, it's to try to dismantle some of the deficit thinking that faculty often have that come to our institution, thinking about communities, color in particular, and communities along the U.S.-Mexico border, where we often hear statistics about, deficiencies in science or deficiencies in abilities. So part of the workshops is to dismantle that thinking by introducing these faculty to the community that they work in and live in. And with the mind frame or the framework to embrace the wealth of the community and thinking with an assets-based framework, right? What are the richnesses of the region that can help faculty do their jobs in regards to the mission of the institution? So we draw from different, scholars out there who write about cultural relevance in the way we teach and do research, and then also why it's important to develop a critical consciousness as a faculty member working at a minority serving institution. The whole goal here is to get them to think about the way that they teach their courses, and not just the way they teach it, but how they approach the students. So we're in our third year of these workshops, and we've seen different ways that courses have been innovated. Next slide, please. And you can see some examples where faculty have brought students out into the community to do kind of community engaged learning, and while helping community partners. And so you see, for example, in the very top photo, a faculty member who teaches soil science and goes and looks at different soil qualities in low-resourced communities and underserved communities in our area. Or faculty who might teach statistics by having their students actually go and collect primary data from community members. So these are things that we're seeing, and our team, next slide, actually has recently won an award from the National Science Foundation to actually evaluate the impact of these innovations, the shifts in teaching philosophies, and the impact it has on the students themselves, the students in our communities. So I'll have one more slide. Next slide, please. So we really wanted to invest in these workshops. These are very intensive workshops. They're a year long. They're with just a half a dozen or more faculty, and we found the perfect partner to help facilitate these workshops in the museum, right, where Francisco is. And so we actually work with the museum, who helps as the primary facilitator of these workshops. I'm going to turn it over to Francisco to talk about how the museum interacts with our faculty.
Thank you, Alex. I think the first thing to note here is really about the history of the place. It's important that we all be situated. I mean, I was taken by Ilana's introductory commentary about situating ourselves in a certain kind of historical moment, honoring the land and honoring the people and the ancestors. I think it's part also of what we are attempting to do with this particular Hispanic serving institution. So one note on the history here. Alex did mention that this university was created in 2015, and it is true, but it was created out of two legacy institutions, the University of Texas Pan American and the University of Texas at Brownsville, that were founded in the 1920s as part of the junior college movement across the country. So these two, small rural communities created junior colleges. So these become eventually part of the University of Texas system. And then because of money issues, they then became one. In 2015, we became UT Rio Grande Valley. And so really had a shot at kind of reiterating and re-identifying ourselves as higher education. The second point there, next to the history, is really the point of the Hispanic serving institution. And so UTPA, UT Brownsville, and then UTRGV have been leaders in the movement toward becoming a Hispanic serving institution. They are the president of UT Pan American back in the 80s and 90s, the president of UT Brownsville back in the 80s and 90s, were really leading the effort to try to do something akin to what HBCUs were or tribal colleges were. So it is, as many of you know, historically Black colleges of the university and tribal colleges, they've been around for a while, but it was the 1965 Higher Education Act during the LBJ administration that created the designation. So Tuskegee and Spelman and Lincoln and others could become part of a kind of a group of schools that could also compete for federal funding to really enhance their programming. And so a number of institutions that were heavily Hispanic student populated wanted to have a similar designation because they also saw particular opportunities and particular needs to really do something about essentially reculturalizing their universities. And so in the early 90s, then the designation of HSI was added on to the Higher Education Act. And so that's actually an important historical occurrence, policy occurrence, and it really begins to shift certain universities like our university into becoming much more Hispanic serving. Now, for a long time, and actually to the present, the lead criterion to become an HSI is that that higher ed institution be 25% or more Hispanic or Latino. And if you are, then by default, you become an HSI. You just have to fill out a form to the federal government. You become that, and you can compete for federal dollars under that designation. For a long time now, for almost a generation, that's really been the driver. So universities want to bring in more Hispanic students to become HSI, qualifiable and competitive. The missing part there, and this is what the literature tells us, that the missing part is that there really hasn't been substantive movement to change the institution into being much more Hispanic serving. That's where we come in. We have been now toiling for a long time to become substantive, meaningful, authentic as a Hispanic serving institution. So the partnership here between the Museum of South Texas History and UTRGV, partnership between Alex and me and other people who are part of our networks, is really about that. It is about what do we do about the curriculum? It is what do we do about the pedagogies? It is what do we do about faculty development so that we reculturalize the university so that the university is much more ready to be able to, number one, identify the opportunities of Hispanic students and their families and the communities. But two, also look at what are the needs, right? So we don't want to lead with the needs. We want to lead with the opportunities because, as Alex described, we really are in a very clear and palpable assets-based kind of movement here. We do not want to feed into the century-plus pathologies of what Mexican or Mexican-American people have been like, because that was the literature really in the social sciences especially. And then it bleeds into how faculty members think about these people. And I'm saying this as somebody who, Raj, when you introduced me, as a child of the borderland. So I got this as a kid growing up, that we could not do this or that. And then you go to college, right? And people talk about you as if you're less than. And then that seeps into systems thinking. And that's not acceptable, especially for a university that says it is a Hispanic serving institution. So my charge here in my partnership with my institution, in partnership with Alex and UTRGV, is to bring history, culture, and family and the understanding therein to faculty members in higher education. And so we do that through a number of different strategies. We bring faculty members into the museum. We take faculty members out to places. We take them into the community. We take them to get to know people. And oftentimes these processes are actually quite rich because a lot of our faculty members do not know the language of the community members. And so the facilitation therein is such a rich experience. And so, it's opportunity upon opportunity to get to know each other in culturally rich ways. So Alex, I'm going to pause there because I think I probably, said enough for now, and then move into, whatever's next, Raj.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you both. Powerful ideas to think about, especially notions of really moving towards asset-based frameworks and reculturalizing the university, and maybe that can lead us into a discussion of what it would look like to reculturize science. Alex, do you have more slides to share?
No, I think we just had included a few pictures there to share with the audience about what the faculty do at our workshops. There's a lot of field trips, as Francisco mentioned, interacting with community partners, with businesses, with farmers, with entrepreneurs. We actually invite community to come onto our campus as well, which has been a unique experience. With faculty, with community who have never stepped foot on this regional campus. And so, we try and create a sense of community, in the sense that what we had talked about a little bit about earlier, where it's not really just an us and them kind of approach, but hey, we're all working together here. We have very similar missions. And so we want to figure out a solution together. And I think this has been a quite interesting process, because we have had faculty members who have redesigned syllabi and had them vetted by community partners, who may not necessarily be let's say subject matter experts, but who actually are experts in their own way, in terms of culture, in terms of history, and in terms of place. It's been a really enriching experience where we have faculty members who have just transformed the way that they talk about their students to their students. And we on our end as evaluators and researchers, we actually have started collecting information where the students who of these faculty who have gone through the professional development workshop have not only shown higher levels of aptitude, meaning to say that their actual scores in their performance in classes like beginning biology or beginning chemistry or beginning math have gone up compared to, let's say, faculty, a control group. But we've also seen a higher sense of belonging, which we measure through different instruments, and which is a very important thing, because it draws us back to what Francisco talked about, where there's the feeling that you get, our students get in their classes in college and at universities. That is the feeling that we want to enhance, and so that they, our students feel like that they not only do they belong there, but they have something to contribute, that they have something to share with others. And so we're starting to collect that evidence as part of our NSF program, but it would not be possible without, someone like Francisco and the Museum of South Texas History, who are the true kind of gatekeepers of this, of the culture of our institution, of our region. And so we're actually helping each other, right? The museum is providing a tremendous service to our institution, but we'd like to also feel like we're helping out the museum in their mission of trying to share the richness and of the culture and the history of South Texas. So it's just been a fantastic partnership that has led to other partnerships. One that I'd like to mention, where now the museum is being brought in to other research programs, other grant development, and involved is from the very beginning in terms of getting them to help formulate different models of thinking and theories of change from the perspective of a non-scientist, but as a subject matter expert in terms of the people and the communities where we work. And so, Francisco has been now a co-PI on many other projects representing the community's interests, needs, and assets, as we discussed. So I think it's been a very fruitful partnership, one that I think can set a model for other institutions elsewhere. There are history museums all over the country, and I think finding the right partnership would be very useful for institutions who have embedded community engagement or public engagement in their own mission.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Francisco. There's a theme emerging around the importance of kind of respectful, mutual relationships and how you design and how you structure those and how they're based on mutual respect. And I think that theme actually is a nice segue into our next presentation, which is from Tanya Shu and Karel Askew. Tanya Shu is the Youth in Action Program Manager, and she's responsible for direct planning, development, and coordination of the college access and mentoring programs at Comunidades Latinas Unidas en Servicio, or CLUS, since 2013. She has over 15 years of experience teaching, encouraging, and empowering Latinx youth and serving their families in nonprofit and public school settings. Through her work at CLUS, she's been part of 2 NSF-funded research projects and is currently a co-PI on the NOISE project, led by leaders of community-based organizations representing communities that have been historically excluded from the sciences. The NOISE project is testing a framework that evolved from researching relationships between science institutions and community-based organizations. Tanya has a BA in Spanish, Cultural Studies, and Teaching English as a Second Language from Northwestern College in Iowa, and a certificate in Translation and Interpreting from the University of Minnesota. She is Latina and is bilingual in Spanish and English. Her partner in this presentation is Karel Askew, PhD. She's an educational program evaluation and research scientist who's devoted to developing the next generation of multicultural and scientists and scientific thinkers. Karel uses culturally responsive and equitable approaches to invite multicultural perspectives into program development and evaluation. Overall, her body of work is centered on federal initiatives intended to broaden access to innovative educational practices for diverse and often marginalized populations. Karel's work has been supported by grants from the U.S. Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and NASA, as well as private foundations like the Kellogg Foundation. Her outlook as a Black female evaluator frames educational studies that consider the convergence of psychological, cultural, and organizational factors on program outcomes. And alongside Doctors Monifa Beverly and Daniela Cook, she's had the pleasure of serving as the lead program evaluator for the NOISE project. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tanya and Karel.
Thanks, Raj. We're excited to share with you today about using the practical tools of working agreements and community non-negotiables for equitable science partnerships and program evaluation. Next slide, please.
It is my pleasure to introduce you to my colleague, Tanya. And what most I want you to know about her is that she is really passionate about impacting Latina families to navigate nonprofit and school systems.
And my pleasure to introduce Karel. And I think that what stands out to me is about how much her work centers on STEM and broadening access to resources for marginalized groups. Next slide, please. So Karel and I worked together on the NOISE project through an NSF award to Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. And the overarching work of this research project is designed to really understand how noise pollution affects our communities, our ecosystem, and our health so we can create real change. But we're doing science and engaging the leadership of communities in a very unique way. We involve communities in the entire research process. And we have 4 community co-PIs on the project serving alongside a PI from the Lab of Ornithology. These co-PIs are also advised by a group of leaders from independent community-based organizations. Next slide, please. So to better understand a little bit about how this project and where it came to be, I'd like to share a little bit about the history. Many of us were involved in a previous AASL award called Examining Contextual Factors that Influence the Implementation of Projects Designed to Improve Cultural Diversity in Informal STEM Programming. So this research project looked to understand how partnerships between informal science education institutions, or ISEs, and community-based organizations, or CBOs, engaged in collaborations. And we are seeing many issues arise that highlighted how and why communities have been historically excluded from the sciences. And as that research continued, a group of independent-based community organizations began a research project of their own that aimed to really name these disparities for what they are. So together, they developed a framework, working agreements, and community non-negotiables to really serve as guides to the ISEs and the CBOs as they were trying to engage in equitable collaborations. Next slide. In the first project, the CBOs partnered with the ISEs. The CBOs that were partnered with the ISEs found themselves frustrated as they navigated discrepancies in power and privilege. They were met with a lack in trust and transparency. They knew that the issues of realities and relevance could not be overlooked and really understood the need for true commitment and collaboration. So the ICBOs used community-based participatory research and grounded theory approaches. This community framework came out of these research learnings. The themes are at the center of what we do and are constantly examined to ensure that we don't fall into the same traps in our work now, that we see so often emerge when science-based institutions work with CBOs. Next slide. In accordance with the community framework, the ICBOs developed these working agreements that guide how we work with each other, and that's the portion that we see here. Also, working rules based on the HEMIS principles for community organizing that puts equity at the center of collaborations and our mission. They outline an equitable decision-making process, and they even ensure that presentations and publications are inclusive and give credit to all that were involved in their creation. These working agreements are foundational to the work of our project and any projects really looking to collaborate with communities. Next slide. So we want to take a look at why it's essential to center community and science through equitable and inclusive intention. Next. So in the first project, the theme of guinea pigs emerged from the partnerships. Studies have shown that institutional review board processes are necessary to protect communities and individuals, but that they're really just not enough to conduct equitable research. So for example, respect for human participants is more than just informed consent. Respect extends to the recognition and the honoring of different worldviews and knowledge systems. So we wanted to create a parallel process from the community perspective that would guide how research is carried equitably in our communities. This led the ICBO group to think about research specifically and led to the creation of the Community Review Board non-negotiables. Next. So how do we center community and science through equitable and inclusive partnership? Next. The ICBOs themselves created the Community Review Board non-negotiables that you can see here to take the IRB a few steps further. Just to highlight a few, the Community Review Board non-negotiables include statements such as that research in our communities must include our communities from the beginning, and that research is beneficial and empowering to our communities, where researchers really understand our community's priorities and the results are always shared with our communities first and in ways that are accessible and clear to everyone, ensuring that the intellectual property that is taken from our communities belongs to our community. Next. So why should communities create their own non-negotiables? Next. These working agreements and non-negotiables are key for communities as they engage in equitable collaborations. Having this set of non-negotiables really helps to keep communities grounded in their own values and missions as they engage in partnerships and research. From the beginning, they can really help to guide the community's yes or no, and even choosing which collaborations they'll enter into, ensuring that their counterparts also have the community's best interests in mind and practice. Sharing these working agreements and non-negotiables with partners also set the pairing up for a more successful partnership, as both come to the table with a clear understanding of how to center community in all aspects of the research and the science being done. Next slide. Having working agreements and non-negotiables help communities intentionally shift power and stay grounded in their values. These formalized agreements and rules help communities to be fearless. And you can see here that my colleague said that having a set of beliefs that are set up to be consistent and considerate allow me to engage or disengage without fear. Next. In collaborations, non-negotiables become a shared path that is so important for equitable collaboration and sets guidelines and boundaries for the group to use in progressing the work. We came together, created a safe space, gained trust with each other, and agreed to work with honesty, trust, and transparency every day. It's been 7 years and we continue to work at it.
So Tanya shared the community perspective, and now I'm going to turn our attention to why scientists should encourage and honor the creation and use of community non-negotiables. To ground, we use the term scientists broadly to encompass scientists, researchers, evaluators, all of us who bring a formal training rooted in Eurocentric paradigms. We also acknowledge that researchers and communities show up to this work from different spaces, literally and figuratively. Let's envision a spectrum of folks who are at different places in knowing how to center community commitments. Next. Our starting point and our common ground is that scientists and community partners share a commitment to valid and reliable data. We are all invested in accurate conclusions about phenomenon and people. And we are interested and invested in use and the usefulness of our work. Next. All the while, we acknowledge that not all help is helpful, and that good intentions don't equal good impact. A mentor of mine, Hazel Simonet, always challenges me and scientists, evaluators, teachers, administrators to move beyond helping to be helpful and to push past good intentions to actually do some good. Non-negotiables move us forward and toward a shared understanding of what communities value as helpful and good. Next. In many ways, next slide, please. Thank you. In many ways, the non-negotiables have held us to account, our evaluation team to account, to live up and live into our professional practices and standards. Equitable research processes used as illustrated here to center culture and equity at each step of the scientific process. You'll note on this slide that step one is all about preparing for the study. So for the evaluation team and for I propose scholars like yourself, it's about showing up, having done our own homework within our communities of practice first. And then the next step you'll notice in an equitable process is beginning to center unapologetically the commitment to learn and work alongside community as members every step of the way, and finding ways to equitably compensate them for the time that they pour into the work. So ultimately, working alongside is where the power shift occurs for us. Next. So how have we used the non-negotiables impacted by research and evaluation in our processes for our current grant?
Next slide, please. So really in thinking about how it's played out in our current project, I'd like to highlight a few of the tangible ways that it's influenced our work. So we have used it to hire external consultants with shared commitments, such as Kirill and her team. We needed to hire evaluators that would honor our process, and that definitely did not look like your typical research project in the ways that decisions are made and who is making them. Equity has been at the center of our process. All are invited to have a seat at the table. There are 4 out of 5 community co-PIs on the project. Our ICBO advisors are being compensated at the same rate as science advisors, and we have developed decision-making processes that allow for all voices to have genuine leadership and decision-making power, just to name a few. The agreements help the community to stand by their values, so there's not only no harm being done, but that there is direct benefit for them. And communities are being welcomed and invited into the space, and they're seen as leaders that are working to ensure that their communities find great benefit from the decisions that are being made and the research that is being done. An example is that the coding of qualitative interviews is always and only being done with community engagement and presence through the full process. We also have community science collaborators, and many of them are young or youth, that are engaged at each site, and they're creatively leading the science, the dissemination of information with the community, working with policy leaders and community engagement and education efforts. Next slide.
We also include ICBOs in our evaluation design and process. Our evaluation team has led work that involved months of listening to discern how community priorities are translated into the work, and then in turn into our evaluation questions and priorities. Our study is guided by 4 questions and a series of sub-questions that move beyond the grant narrative to really understand how the work and the goals are taking shape alongside the community-based work. Our processes were grounded in their frameworks, their agreements, their decision-making protocols. So what this means is that we present in open forums, we seek community insight, we provide clarification where it's needed in our thinking and our thought process. We work towards transparency. We have shared understandings about the work. We allow space between meetings for reflection before decisions are made. This might include individual calls with team members and community members. And then we bring that back after having incorporated feedback until the community is satisfied that the work is going to yield worthwhile outcomes for them. Protocols are created and commented on in partnership with communities before data collection begins. And we seek community feedback to understand the data and the format of deliverables that will suit their immediate needs and their audiences. So for example, we worked with each community-based organization to create their own theory of change for the work, and it took so many different forms. So ultimately, what we've found and what we experience day to day is that the research process is strengthened when there is centering and honoring of the inherent strengths and wisdom of the community's systems and their structures. Next slide. So what do you need to know about how to do this work?
It takes extra time.
So putting in the work to build just relationships, common language, shared understandings. The value is that this work moves forward in solidarity and mutuality to actually achieve true impact.
Disagreements are part of it.
We work through disagreements. Scientists, evaluators, we all have our own processes, procedures, standards, and we also remember that community partners do as well. There's always more than one way to get to something and do it with integrity.
It's important to create living documents.
We revisit documents like the non-negotiables, which are guides for our work regularly. It's a system of checks and balances for all parties engaged, and edits are necessary as the work evolves.
This isn't just a quick fix, though.
Never a quick fix. We take a long view. We all have a part in making sure that the impact of the work is positive. Scientists have a responsibility to uphold the integrity of this work during and even beyond the grant.
Systems change is necessary.
Oh, yes. We rethink how things are done constantly. We're always pushed in this way. I'm hearkening back to Amanda Gorman's quote that we heard during the presidential address. It isn't always just isn't always justice. And actually, it rarely is justice.
There has to be investment in the community.
Community stakeholders must be compensated equitably and credited for their intellectual property and the work that is at the heart of what we do.
There are going to be growing edges on both sides.
Yep, shared decision-making is really true power. In doing so, we're truly understanding and moving forward on community priorities.
It is necessary to focus on community benefits throughout.
Yep, we must work to balance power and privilege, do it intentionally and do it by design. This is how to advance equity and inclusion. Together, we're learning, we're changing, we're growing, all parties, communities, and institutions. And with that, we thank you and we look forward to a really engaging and generative conversation. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our presenters, not just for talking about sort of respectful partnerships, but modeling them in practice. That was really inspiring to see. We have lots of time for discussion, and so I want to invite folks who have questions or comments or thoughts or things they'd like to share to please do that. And just to kind of kick things off, I thought I'd ask, as I was listening to you, I was inspired. You guys are doing really cool things. Why? What drives you to this work? What makes this be the thing you want to do when you get up in the morning?
Want me to kick it off? Francisco, you're about to say?
Now, please go.
Because honestly, it's life and death for me, my family, and the communities that we serve. We don't have time to not do good work that's impactful. There are too many disparities, too many challenges that we face as a nation together. And innovation is about changing new ideas. And the ways we're going to get that is by increasing the voices of people who are at the table making decision-making power. So for me, it's not a choice.
Francisco, I think you were about to say something.
I think a lot of this for me and for, I think my brothers really has been about honoring my father and my mother. You know, my parents, my mother never went to school. She was raised in rural Mexico. My father went up to the 4th grade in rural Mexico also. My father was threatened. I mean, he was about to be killed, you know, when he was like an irrigation guy in Mexico. And so he and my mother decided to leave Mexico to come to this country. And they came really just thinking that they could have a better life for their children. It was just hope. And, you know, it is a sense of hope that is so ingrained, I think, in the minds and in the souls of my brothers and me. And so, like, you know, you read somewhere, Raj, that I published like 50 articles or whatever. Most of those are about my mother and my father. You know, and my brother, you know, I'm one of 4 boys, Mexican boys who were raised in the US. And 3 of us have PhDs, 3 of the 4 boys. And our research agenda is about my parents and about the kind of triumphant spirit that they showed, not only us, but also our neighbors. And, you know, they just modeled that throughout, you know, and so they're, you know, I mean, that's for me is what it is. And, you know, I have to honor my parents. And as I do that, I need to model that for other children and other students and other teachers and principals and university faculty members. So I'll send them my stuff so that they can read. You know, that my brother and I published this piece on the power of plática, conversation, because it's how our parents, you know, taught us. And so go read this. This is how I was influenced, you know. And so, and then it turns out that everybody's influenced by their parents' pláticas. You know, and maybe we hadn't thought about it. So I'm thinking, oh my God, like these great scholars, my father and my mother, have so much to offer if I examine their lives.
Thank you.
I think something that kind of comes to mind for me, you know, we talked about power and privilege being part of the work that we do and really naming it for what it is. And I think for me too, recognizing that I do have that, you know, and especially feel it with the Latinx community where I'm part Latina, part white, you know, grew up here in the United States. I understand more about the systems and how they work and how to navigate them. And so I think for me, it's kind of recognizing, okay, what power and privilege do I have and how am I helping others to get that as well? How am I helping my Latinx students to learn how to navigate them, to stand up and use their voices, to have access to be in spaces where they can make some of those decisions, be leaders along the way. And so I think even in projects like this, kind of having that direct connection and that opportunity, I think is so important. And so I think the work that I do is around supporting the Latinx community in particular to be fully engaged, to be understanding how to navigate the system so that they and their families can continue moving ahead, and to really also recognize the beauty and the strength that is within them. I love hearing about Alex and Francisco's work too, to really starting in that place. And that's what we try to do in our program, in our work as well, is start there and help with the skills and the tools necessary to and the access as well. So.
Thanks. Alex?
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because, you have, the four of us here, we all have these really strong internal motivations, right? I mean, and this is a big challenge because, how do you develop those internal motivations in folks who don't necessarily have it, who don't draw from their own personal experiences that drive them? I think, Kirill and Tanya and Francisco, myself, we kind of have similar narratives about who we are and why who we are drives what we do as a profession, right? And I think the story that Francisco shared is the story of most of our students that we serve, myself included, as an immigrant to this country. And so, I'll admit this, it's not by accident that the faculty who enroll in the faculty development workshops tend to also fit that mold, that these are, immigrant faculty or first generation faculty, minority faculty. And to be perfectly frank, they don't necessarily reflect the demography of faculty in the College of Sciences. And we see this all the time, right? The folks who sign up for service-oriented projects, those tend to be minority faculty, women faculty, who have the kind of personal and intrinsic drive to do this kind of work. I mean, Kirill and Tanya summarize it perfectly. I mean, it takes time and it takes a lot of extra time and effort that isn't necessarily reflected in your professional obligations as a faculty member or as a scientist. And hardly ever are you evaluated on, well, what kind of positive community impact have you done? When we get evaluated by the academy or by your own department, it's never about, what is the faculty, what is the impact that you have on community? And so, I think in my capacity, I'll tell you this, and when we wrote the grant with Francisco, I was as an administrator. Actually, I worked as an associate dean at the time we applied for the grant. And a big part of it was, well, how do we develop extrinsic motivators? So for individuals who do not have what this panel has, how do we get them to start thinking about it? Well, we quickly realized that, that is that whole system where it's very hard to shift, right? And so what Francisco and I have done is just try to instill at least a little bit of to add to that intrinsic motivation of faculty, to get them to honor that and respect that kind of pull to do that work and to support them as well, as institutions, as the College of Sciences and with the Museum of South Texas History. Because I think really like the common theme here has been intrinsic motivation to do the work.
So Alex, that actually, one of the questions that came in from the audience speaks to that. They're asking how you make scientists, or help maybe would be another way to put it. How do you help scientists step outside their routine and actively participate in these initiatives, given that maybe not everyone has that intrinsic motivation initially, and that some of the extrinsic rewards are motivated or pushing in a different direction? How do you overcome resistance? I'll start with you, Alex, and then open it up to everybody, because I think everyone could talk about this.
Well, I think there's you kind of have to find those who have a little bit of that intrinsic motivation. And so when we do these faculty development workshops, it's by volunteer. We actually do offer the faculty a stipend to participate. It's a very modest stipend, but for most of us, we don't get paid much. So maybe that's an incentive on its own, right? We offer the same stipend actually to the community partners who we draw in as resources, right? And say, hey, look, we will, the same way we honor faculty time and effort, we would love to offer your, an incentive, same compensation for you for your time and effort to help train our faculty. Surprisingly, we showed some pictures at the very end. We start our faculty development. We're adjusting this based on COVID, but our faculty development workshop started with a 3-day intensive tour of the region, where we brought faculty members on a bus across the region. They spent the night at various places in the region, and they were just introduced to the area. We have faculty who worked with our university for 20 plus years who have never visited any of these sites before. They've never left the kind of confines or the neighborhoods around the universities, right? So they don't know the richness of the area. And so one of the ways that we kind of just do this is to shift. I work with all scientists, and so we kind of implore them to collect primary evidence on their own of the communities in which they serve and they work and live and are members of. And so, and of course, the environments we bring them to are specifically selected to get them and facilitate in a way by Francisco and his team to get them in a way to really reflect critically on their role as a faculty member at this institution. And so, we have had faculty who have been there for 20 years, and we actually really target new faculty who have come to this university and maybe don't even, and a lot of who don't even realize what it means to be at a minority serving institution and that privilege and that responsibility of being there. So I think that's in part what we do. It's a big investment, but as Kirill said, the investment is worthwhile, right? And so we're fortunate to have some support from the National Science Foundation and also from the College of Science to do that.
Kirill, Tanya, any experiences you've had with helping move reluctant scientists along on this pathway?
I think honestly, the thing that really just stands out to me is if people are doing science, right, they want it to be done well. They want it to have good results that actually produce results or change or, share the knowledge, that type of thing. And I honestly don't feel like that can be done to the fullest without active community engagement and participation and leadership throughout. And so I think my challenge or my encouragement would be, if you want the science to be done really well and you want it to be as full as you hope it to be and to go as far as you hope it to go, that has to include that genuine collaboration with the community. I think that, when it comes down to the practical steps of it, I think, we talked about the working agreements in what we shared. And so creating kind of that shared agreement of how are we working together? How is, research being done in the community? How are we, kind of checking ourselves to ensure that it's not kind of status quo agenda as always. And that has to be a part of it. It has to look different. I feel like in order to get the results that you're really looking for when articles stay published off in whatever journal, how is that really impacting the community? How is that creating tangible results? How is that being, how is equity being looked at? I think honestly, that's kind of what's coming to mind for me is to really get the results that you're looking for. It has to look different than what it has in the past.
So really just kind of appealing to this idea that good science requires doing this new kind of work. One of the practical questions that's come up a couple of times from the audience, you've all mentioned compensating people. How do you do that? What funding sources do you tap in to do that kind of equitable compensation?
It's always good to have money. I mean, that's for sure. So if you have a grant, you can certainly do that. To me, that's not the greatest compensation. And I'll take you to a story of an oral history that I was doing once with this Italian historian who was one of the foremost oral historians in the world. And so I asked him, Lisandro, how is it that you reciprocate when you take the story of an elder from the community or anybody from the community? Do you give them a copy of the VHS? It was a VHS environment at the time, or do you pay them or whatever? And he said to me something that's really stuck with me. He says, no, what I do is I try to frame this as you just explored your story and you own it. And I'm going to do everything I can so that you understand this is your story, not my story. And I thought, that's quite a gift. Now, what I do as an oral historian is I used to create DVDs and then give it to them and then do something else. Right now it's links. So we do an oral history and it's the link and I send it to the entire family. So you got it forever, that sort of thing. But it's never enough. It cannot be transactional. There's got to be something else. It's got to be, something that's psychological and meaningful and authentic to them, not to you, but to them. Finding out what that is, what that dynamic is really the first order of business.
That's a powerful idea. I heard that a little bit from Clues too, right? Like the idea that just putting a name on a research paper, absolutely important to honor that intellectual contribution, but contribution that's meaningful in a non-academic context is just as important. Okay, couple of questions folks are wondering.
May I add to that?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
Scholars value, community-based organizations impart value too, right? It's about getting their name out so that they can garner grant funds and recognition for what they do. So something as simple as co-authorship and getting that organization or that partner's name out there that they can cite when they write the next grant is as important to, I think, a scholar as it is to a community-based organization as well.
So thanks for saying that, Carl. That makes me wonder, are there other ways? So challenge me if this is wrong, but science has a certain privilege in our society. Are there ways we can leverage that privilege, or share, maybe is a better word, share that privilege with some of our community partners? What does that look like? That's for everybody, but I'll start with you, Carl.
Is the entire answer. I just wanted to get that out too, right? That it's not communities acting behind the scenes. They can't continue to be behind the scenes of our work. They need to be colleagues, equal colleagues in the work, because it is their scholarship.
Foregrounding and celebrating that.
Yeah.
A big part. Okay, what else?
I think also just having an awareness of the kind of privilege that a scientist has, or a scholar has, or somebody like, all of us here have unbelievable privilege, some maybe more than others, right? And so it's issues of race and class and gender and all of that, to be sure. But, whatever privilege we have, I think that it's really about the intentionality and the consciousness of how we use that privilege. I remember being chairing a countywide committee on drainage improvement. And we had just passed the bond issue for like $160 million. And there was, the public voted for. And so we were raising $160 million, and there were colonias, unincorporated communities that had never gotten a fair share. So just because I chaired the committee, I gave them $15 million. I mean, that's kind of an easy way to say it, right? It wasn't me. But what it was is about facilitating the meeting in certain ways so that they could speak, and so that other men wouldn't occupy those kind of spaces. But it was the women who spoke, and their testimony was so compelling that Commissioners Court then said, yes, that 15 million that we haven't assigned, give it to them. Their story is too powerful. That's a lot of privilege that I had in the facilitated process. And we actually occupy those spaces often. It's about what we do with those spaces. And actually, I didn't go there because I'm that good, but I went there because a few ladies told me to go there. Women from the community.
And you know what, Raj, let me add just kind of a practical sense. I think there's ways that we can compensate folks, but we can't do it kind of post hoc, right? I mean, a lot of these budgets, if you're writing a grant with someone, you have to include those up front, and they have to be in the budget right away. So, I would suggest to those who are thinking about this is that they look into the policies by their own institutions about what it means to craft a budget with honorarium for folks. How do those organizations actually issue payment? And there might be some partners where they do not qualify to receive an honorarium. And so you have to include other ways to compensate those partners, right? And, Francisco and I talk about this a lot. A lot of community partners, they really want capacity in some form. It can be monetary, but it also can be in, actual training or training with skills that build capacities in communities, right? And so for some of ours, we can assign them continuing education credits if they participate in, in these workshops, for example, right? And so then they build their own capacity with their own resume, with their own profile, with their own portfolio of skills and credentials. And as Kirill mentioned, those credentials matter when those folks, when those our partners want to apply for similar types of funding. So that's number one. I've heard that there is, and I don't know who's listening on here, but I heard that there's something called a physical honorarium if you're applying for the National Science Foundation or other federal funding. I can't tell you whether will not confirm or deny whether that's true, but I would suggest folks, if they want to, provide some sort of honorarium for folks, like a backpack or something that is useful to folks. I worked with I have a colleague who did a lot of work with tribal groups up in the Pacific Northwest, and physical honorariums were just as good as financial honorariums, right? And of course, I will suggest, if you do a physical honorarium, you do not put any advertising logos on them, because that that apparently isn't allowed. So, I would just suggest for those who are thinking about this to plan early. We recently have a new federal grant that I just received that has financial incentive payments for farmers who want to implement conservation innovation on their farms. They don't do it just out of their own pocket. We value their time and effort to set up these natural experiments so that we can learn from them, and we pay them. We negotiated a price what is fair, and I pay them per acre on how to do it. That is all up front, and you leave it up to, you read the RFA very closely, you make sure that those are allowed, and then you leave it up to the agencies to decide how to do it. And sometimes they'll say, hey, this is a great idea, but some of these are not allowed. Let's redraft how you made your budget. So those are just some practical pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think thinking about the Noise Project, a few of the things that we're doing to try to make it a little bit more equitable. I'm not going to say that it is fully right. There are a lot of systems in place that don't let it be that way fully. But I think some of the ways that we are working to take steps in that direction and doing what we can, or that the project can, to compensate a little more equitably, is taking a look at, we have advisors on the project, from evaluation advisors to science advisors to community advisors, and they all are getting compensated at the same rate, because we recognize that they're all bringing value to the work, that they all are coming with their own set of expertise and experience and knowledge. And so that's one of the ways. Also with there are 4 different sites that get a certain amount of money for participating as well, and for our engagement in the process. And then also within that as we're engaging community science collaborators, so people who are local in the community, actually driving the work forward, in reaching out kind of beyond those involved directly in the project, that they're also getting compensated for their time. And so those are just a few of the ways, and maybe Kirill, if you have others that you could speak to. But the one thing that's coming to mind, though, that it feels important to name, is to not necessarily look for, okay, what are the 3 things that I can do to, look at compensating equitably, or what's a quick fix, right? We said it's not a quick fix. And so it's not just that, it's not just saying, okay, we compensated. It's also, like we were talking about, taking the power and privilege that you have and looking for all of the different ways throughout the entire process of how can that be shared, how can access be granted, how can you use what you have to even more fully engage the community and support the community in more equitable ways. And so whether it is Kirill reaching out and saying, hey, I know of this opportunity, share this with your community. They would be great to serve on this project, or to have this, paid internship opportunity or fellowship opportunity, something like that. It's not just, again, kind of using them as an example, coming in and saying, okay, we're the evaluators, here's our evaluation work done. It's more fully engaging in the process. It's, connecting with and empowering, and not even empowering, but like sharing wisdom, sharing learnings with and from the community science collaborators themselves, and partnering more fully in that process. It's the Lab of Ornithology saying, hey, let's connect, let's have more direct connections, not, removed, the community is how many steps removed from engaging with the scientists, and say, let's bring them together and let's have them learn together and learn from each other, and build those direct connections. And so, it's taking a look at where did maybe Alex was talking a little bit about, where did we maybe not figure this out in the beginning, and how can we change that along the way, whether it is saying, okay, we need to hire a different evaluation team, or okay, we need to figure out how to compensate in an area that we had overlooked or that we didn't anticipate. And so again, it's not just what are the few boxes you can say, yep, it's done equitably, or yep, we compensated the community. It's how are you more fully doing that throughout the entire process, in your actions, in your words, in your work and compensation in so many different ways.
That's great. I mean, I think I'm hearing compensation isn't just about money. Compensation doesn't start halfway through the projects. It's part of the design of the project, and it's a compensation. The conversation about compensation is co-created in the same way conversations about everything else you do are co-created. Thank you. There's, I think, a set of questions coming in around how you do this work, how you get started. What should you read? What are some baby steps you can take? So imagine somebody wanting to kind of to get started. What do you recommend? What papers should they read? What practices should they try? How can they learn more and do more?
You know, if I could just jump in really quick, because I just had this discussion with students, new students in my lab, undergraduate students. And what I do is I just have them go and follow other graduate students or other students who are doing all sorts of work. And I said, you know what, just follow them and figure out, you know, something may come up that none of us have thought of. Something, you know, you might see something that we can't see. And, you know, often when that happens and we really kind of genuinely invite them to participate, you know, it could be just like, hey, we need you to do this, we need you to do this activity. They might say, hey, you know what, I just kind of came up with something. And you know what, why I say that, Raj, is because sometimes we just need stimuli, right? I mean, we need to understand. So when we bring faculty out to community, we just start seeing their wheels think and roll, and they're saying, hey, you know what, I never thought of this, but I could bring my students here in this setting. And so I think just for the first step is to really just kind of put yourself out there and willing to learn, you know, if you're in that position. And you know, and to do so in a genuine way, right? And so we try, like, you know, in this case, Francisco and I are facilitating that for our faculty and putting them in situations where we actually invite them to ask those kinds of questions. And so I think that's the first step. And you know, the second is of course you have to also be informed, and not just informed of what you just read, that maybe other people who you're working with haven't read, but also informed in terms of collecting primary evidence from your partners as well, right? And saying, hey, look, I know what this is saying, but you know, when I'm talking to this farmer, I'm talking to this counterpart here, they're telling me something different, right? And so I think some questions will come up that you know can help you actually start to kind of formulate a shared question. Kirill kind of describe this endogenous process where, you know, it happens in conversation with your partners. So it's just going to take some time to be out there, to kind of do that experiential part, and then also to ask questions, and then also respond to questions that are being asked, either verbally or nonverbal, right? And so it is a process that does take some finesse, right? And so I wouldn't just throw anyone out there and saying, hey, here you go, you know what, it's your charge to be a community engaged scholar as a bench chemist. You know, I mean, you know, there are certain situations where I think, you know, those general rules that Kirill and Tanya described apply. But I think it's just about getting to that point where you feel that stimulation happening through both reading and through experience.
Thanks. I'm gonna, I want to just mention one of the potential opportunities to learn more is reading. And a book you might try is called Reframing Community Partnerships in Education, Uniting the Power of Place and the Wisdom of People. And one of the co-authors of that book is on our panel, Francisco. And I noticed from the author list, it might have been one of the things you wrote with your brother. Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
I appreciate that. I know it's self-serving, but I did want to say, just in addition to Alex, a couple of things about Alex. First of all, you hear his chickens, because he's got chickens. He raises chickens.
Can't mute that out. It's hard to mute that out. I don't know what to do.
You can't muzzle the chickens, that's for sure. But the other thing is that I think that especially for, you know, scientists who may be incubated in higher education, is that there just needs to be like a whole systems change in the thinking about scientists, because scientists tend to focus on science. and not necessarily on relationships, that, or investing in understanding how to build relationships, like with each other, but also with the community. And I think that's been something that we have found in our work that's actually been so exciting, that if you take them there, they actually want to do that. They just haven't been through that, because they're not going to do community work if they don't understand how to build relationships, with the community. So you got to take them there, develop some skills, understand the power of the relationship and that sort of thing. And then we can begin to reframe how we work with community, or how the community works with us, how we do things together.
I would
Carol, you were gonna-
add, don't go it alone. There is someone on your campus, maybe not within your department, but there's someone on your campus, someone in your organization, someone in your community that you can link arms with to learn, to grow, to move the work forward. I would also say some open resources. Google things like 10 things that you need to know to be an ally. Google 103 things white people can do for racial justice. Google white accomplices. And we all need to do that, because Kendi reminds us racism is a verb, right? Just because we show up how we do doesn't mean that because our training, it seeps in naturally, right? We have to undo and unlearn. And there's so many ways that we can show up to do that, but don't go it alone. I do my very best when I'm doing work that engages community to do that alongside partners, right? Because we cannot hold all the perspectives, all the values, all the competing in one mind. We need a team. So if you're beginning this work and you're wading into the waters, do it with a partner. And then when you've done some of that homework and your partner and you agree it's time to unleash, do it with community as well. Right?
And let me, Carol, you bring an important point, because I think, in some of my work, I get to a point where I'm like excited about an idea, and I think a lot of scientists get to this point, right? And I think one question that we have to ask, and sometimes we get to the point where we're stuck because we want to do some like community engaged work and we're stuck. One question that I've asked that actually brought me to Francisco was, well, whose job is it to do this, right? And if you ask that question, you have to find that person and then build a relationship with that person.
Yeah.
Because then the next question that you can say to that person is, well, how can I help you do your job? Because you're going to help me do mine, right? And that kind of partnership that, some of the things that I think about is that, there are people who are getting paid to do this. They're getting compensated to do this. Now, they're also probably internally motivated to do it, right? And like, this panel being a prime example of that. But this is also our job, right? And so I think we're all here because we agree that we can't do it alone. We need to have help, right? And so, like you mentioned, Kirill, that question, you say, hey, like, whose job is it? And let me kind of tap into them and the resources that they bring to this table. And so in our group, for example, Francisco is part of our team. We also have education scholars. I'm not an education scholar, but they're part of the team because it's their job to try and do better understanding of this. We also had the associate vice president of community engagement in our college, who was part of this team as well, because and it's in their mission. Right, so we're just all doing the same job together, and I that's just a tip for those out there who are at that point.
Thanks. We're running. We're getting. I can't believe this. We're already getting close to the end of the session. This has been an amazing discussion. I'm going to try to get through as many questions as we can. So this is like the lightning round. Short answers as much as you can. What if you're a basic science researcher? Like, for example, the example that someone gave was a cancer research that hasn't yet moved from mouse model studies to human studies. What does community partnership look like in that case?
Just to respond, there's actually a gradient, and I was thinking about who wrote this. There's an article that I'll see if I can share later, but they actually wrote about how certain professions and certain types of sciences kind of lend towards community engagement a little bit more, right? In my work in agriculture, it's a no-brainer. Education researchers the same. But there are certain disciplines where it's a lot harder to kind of really push the community engagement. Theoretical scientists kind of are on one end of the spectrum. So, I mean, you know, I don't really have a short answer, Raj. I think that however, there are ways that you can engage as a scientist of any level, because some of this information that are being generated that often is funded through public resources must be public. And I think there are different ways that folks can begin kind of on that spectrum of community engagement is to just find ways that they can participate and interact with community in meaningful ways. And if you look on the AAAS website, there are kind of general guidelines that they put out on the Center for Science and Technology. I think that's what they're called. Sorry, I should know this, right? But they actually have like some guidelines on how to do this for any profession, you know, and it could just be kind of delivering talks in your community that share your expertise in a meaningful way, you know. So
I think kind of what was coming to mind for me was like, get creative and think through. I mean, first of all, like, even who are the students that are working on your project? You know, are you bringing a group of diverse students who are even coming at the science from different perspectives? I think as well, engaging with them to think about how do we, like Alex was saying, spread this beyond our little research project or maybe big research project right here, but how are we engaging the community? Are the students, or are you, you know, whether it's doing talks, is it engaging with science classrooms? Is it helping, you know, a school, a classroom, or someone to help with some of the research as well? So they're getting that access, they're learning about the careers, they're learning about the research process. I think even creative ways like that, you know, again, what's the box to check off of how do we engage, but like think creatively and bigger and broader and differently, maybe than, you know, than just kind of getting the work done of how are you bringing community along with you? How are you looking to them for leadership, for their new ideas, for engaging with the science differently as well.
And the other thing I'd say, and I've seen this be successful at a program in the UK, ask communities where they see themselves plugging into this research. They might have great ideas. It might require you to shift a little bit or draw on a larger set of connections, not just your narrowly focused research, but ask the question of the community groups you're talking to. An interesting question go ahead, Francisco.
Well, I was going to tell a story about like the cancer scientist, for example. I would say, you know, what are the experiences that she has had along the way that would get her closer to want to engage community? And so if that cancer scientist has really just been relegated to the lab, then the level of readiness to engage may not be there. But the one story that I wanted to share was that, you know, I called Alex one day. This is when the pandemic was just taking off in 2020. I said, Alex, you know, I need some information here because I want to understand the virus and that sort of thing. So Alex put me in touch with a virologist. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but, you know, yeah, virologist, right? So I talked to this guy. He gave me a lot of really good stuff to understand. One of the points that he made was that, you know, this is so much about public awareness, public education. And so, you know, where that led me was to begin an initiative that we're calling the Bearing Witness Initiative, where we look for people in the community who have been taken by the virus. We interview family members who bore witness to the life of, and then we managed to get all the regional newspapers in the area to give us a column per week. And so we've been writing articles where we celebrate people for 20 straight weeks. And last week, I sent the last one to the Monitor, the newspaper, right? To the managing editor. I said, this is the last one, Michael, blah, blah, blah. And you know what he said? He wrote back saying, you can't stop. He said, because when you guys began to publish Bearing Witness articles, we began to see a decline in the deniers writing letters to the editor. And then he said, by about the 15th week, there was no sound from that end. And he said this, he said, people who have been denying the virus have been confronted with stories and names and faces. You can't stop. That's the impact of this kind of relationship and partnership between a conversation that I had with Alex, sending me to a virologist, who then gives me kind of a different, lens through which to look at science. And I have the ability to, to be able to write the stuff, interview people, and then, build a relationship with the daily papers to give me space. So it's not simple, right? It's multi-layered, but because certain people are already predisposed to this happening, you can have impact for the social good. It's a bit of a long story, my apologies, but that's a story of impact right there because of the relationships and the partnerships.
That takes us right up to where, I mean, that's a beautiful place to stop. So let's hold that story in our heads. I want to thank you for the work you do. I want to thank you for sharing that work. I want to thank you for the courageous way you bring your whole self to that work. I want to thank everybody who came to this session for all of the wonderful questions and thoughts, and just invite us all to think about how we can take this work forward. How can we share what we learned? How can we continue to advance this really important work that I think has the potential to change science in powerful ways that make it a better partner in building a better future for everyone. Alana, thank you. Back to you.
Raj, Kirill, Tanya, Francisco, and Alex. Trying to compose myself here. So I'm going to leave up this slide for a moment. We didn't get it at the end of Tanya and Kirill's presentation. They're participants in their work. So I wanted to share that. And then also for those of you on the virtual platform, toggle over please one more time to the poll section next to the Q&A section. And we have one last poll for you to wrap up our session here. So let me pull this up. This is a question about one word that you will carry with you from today's discussion. So we already have some folks answering, but I'll just give another moment for those of you who are getting over to the polls to respond. So I'm seeing relationships, partnership, collaboration, don't stop, culturally relevant, non-negotiables, cultural wealth. Thank you. That's great. Okay, we'll leave that open. And you can keep on responding to it. And here is a link, as I said, for a survey. We'd really appreciate if you could just take a few minutes after this to respond to that survey and help us improve for next year. Give us your good feedback too. And you can just copy and paste that. It's also going to be put into the Q&A section of the chat of the platform so that you can fill that out. I just want to share a few more quick slides about things that are going on at this meeting. Next week, we have lots of other science communication and public engagement related sessions, and we've compiled all of them for you. So this URL has a link to that PDF if you're interested in attending other parts of the AAAS annual meeting. Many of those are free as well. We'll put that in the chat. I also want to note that next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we're having a celebration virtually of our AAAS Public Engagement Award winners. We have two, the Bamik Award for Public Engagement with Science and the Early Career Award for Public Engagement with Science. So we're really excited to celebrate these two amazing women. And next Wednesday as well at 5 p.m. Eastern, we have a virtual networking reception for those of you interested in public engagement with science. So please join us there. It'll be a fun break and chance to get to know others in this community. All right, so I want to note again that we have breakout sessions this afternoon. So take a break and come back and join us, please. 1:30 p.m. Eastern, these are 3 sessions. And then again at 3 p.m. Eastern, we have 3 more sessions as well. So thank you all so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon. Thanks again so much to our moderator and panelists.